Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Tuesday morning. It's sunny outside, it's great to be alive, and thank you for joining us for our Bible talk for today. Before we begin our talk today, please may I ask for your prayers. Today is the licensing, and I begin my secondment in Tamworth. I am still the Vicar of Penn and will remain the Vicar of Penn, but for about 2/3 of my time, I'm going to be, whilst living in Penn, I'm going to be helping out in Tamworth over there. Very excited about it. And I'm also totally confident that the clergy here, and they've got a fantastic team here in Penn, this churches here are not just going to tick over, they're going to flourish, and God's going to do great things in the next 6 months. But please could you pray for me in Tamworth, pray that things go well, and pray for tonight, that'd be great. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, and I'm going to read you now. We're in Matthew 17, I'm going to start at verse 14 to 21, so here goes. When they came to the crowd, a man came to Jesus, knelt before him and said, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he's an epileptic and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him." Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was cured instantly. And the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "Because of your little faith. For truly I tell you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Right. Several things you can say from this. many sermons, many a Bible study, many a time of reflection on this. I think the first intriguing thing about this is to remind you of the context. Jesus has just gone up the mountain, and with three of his sort of close disciples, and he's had this amazing. Events that we talked about yesterday. We call the Transfiguration. He's lit up. He's had Moses and Elijah. He's had the voice of God, the cloud, and everything. He's had this amazing, fancy word for it, is theophany. This great experience of God up the mountain. He's gone up there and he's heard God's voice, and it's been a fantastic time. And must have had a wonderful and affirming time of God, hearing God saying, "This is my son, listen to him, I love him," and so on and so on. Must have been fantastic. And he comes down the mountain, and what does he walk into? A crowd of controversy. The other 9 disciples, the ones that are left behind, have got into controversy because this man's brought his son who's got a demon, and is clearly very distressed. And the man's brought this boy to Jesus, to the other 9 disciples, and they haven't managed to cast out. And there's clearly a right old rumpus going on. So Jesus comes down from the mountain, from this fantastic time with God, and he walks straight into controversy. And I suppose, in a sense, it does kind of remind us really of what Christian faith is like. That Christian faith is not just about spending lots of time in lovely gardens where everything's quiet and serene. The Christian life is not one great big, long, fantastic, wacky spiritual experience. It isn't like that. It's also lived out in the world, and it has to be grounded in reality. And Jesus, as I say, he's had this fantastic time with God, and he comes down, and his disciples can't heal this boy. And Jesus gets exasperated. "Ah, you perverse and faithless generation." These are strong words. Faithless means you haven't got enough faith, and perverse is you're twisted, you know. And he exasperates. But what I'm saying is, he comes down from the mountain, this fantastic experience of God, and he comes right into this hotbed of controversy. And like I said, I think it reminds us that the Christian faith is not just lived out in nice, cuddly experiences and lovely sort of serene, where everything's serene and lovely. I remember going to Jerusalem 2 years ago, where it was, and we went through Jerusalem and reminding where the cross happened, the cross of Jesus, and it wouldn't have been serene and lovely. It would have been a busy town, busy city with people everywhere and so on. So, like I said, the Christian faith is not just lived out in sort of lovely serenity and wacky experiences of God. It's actually very much in amongst the controversy and real life. It's very much a real life religion. That's the first thing. Second thing, which is interesting, is that the disciples here, the other 9 disciples, clearly haven't got it right. And what is quite interesting, actually, quite a lot in this gospel, is you realize that sometimes the disciples get it very right, and sometimes they get it very wrong. A classic example was a couple of days ago with Peter, wasn't it? One minute he's the rock on which he's going to build his church, and the next minute he's saying, "Get behind me, Satan." So sometimes the disciples get it very, very right, and sometimes they get it very, very wrong. And they clearly haven't got it right here. But what is interesting is that they don't get sacked or replaced or anything like that. I mean, Judas does later, but that's a different story. They clearly, as I say, get it right sometimes and wrong others. And what is interesting is that the Bible does not fight shy of telling us when the disciples got it wrong. And I think, again, it tells us really that the disciples are very human, that they're ordinary human beings like you and I, with temptations, frustrations. And as I say, in our Christian life, sometimes we'll get it very right. And sometimes we'll get it horribly, horribly wrong. But actually, that's all right. And they did, so we can. And what I think I like about it is that Jesus then, they then have they have a conversation later. They sit down privately and they kind of talk it over. And they ask him where it was that they went wrong. They ask him why they couldn't cast it out. So, like I said, the Christian life is, as I say, led out in real down-to-earth life. And secondly, the disciples were down-to-earth human beings like you and I. And sometimes they got it right, and sometimes they didn't. As I say, the Bible does not fight shy. It doesn't cover it up. It's very honest about it. But as I say, Jesus still goes with them. Jesus doesn't sack them. Jesus takes time to talk it over with them later. Jesus still loves them. But I guess, like I said, I think it's quite reassuring that sometimes we can get it wrong, and that's all right too. And that's the second thing. The third thing is that they asked Jesus, "What is it, that happened here? Why couldn't we do it?" And Jesus says, sort of little faith. He says, if you have even a faith the size of a mustard seed, you could move mountains, and nothing is impossible. And it's quite an interesting phrase, because I don't think it means literally, if you have a little faith, you can move mountains. I mean, as one of my commentaries says, there's no evidence that Jesus or God ever used their faith to alter the topography of the Middle East. It didn't happen like that. I heard a lovely story about somebody who once prayed that God would move the mountain, and apparently God replied, "Quite like the mountain where I put it in the first place, thanks very much." It doesn't mean literally move mountains. I think mountains here means obstacles in life. I think it means that sometimes in our life we can encounter, and in our faith and in our life, we encounter what feel like mountains. We encounter obstacles that are quite difficult things to get over, if you see what I mean. And I think what it means is, even if we have a small amount of faith, it means that nothing is impossible, and God can get us through. And I guess what I want us to do this morning is to pray again for that wonderful gift of faith. That enormous power is in the name of Jesus. And I think if we could pray that God would give us more faith, to trust Jesus, that Jesus has the power, that Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and in His strength we can live life, because in His power and His strength. And I think actually, if we could somehow pray and somehow allow God to work through us, if we could somehow sometimes let go and let God, and trust in God's power a bit more and trust in our own strength a bit less, I think our lives would be better for it. And I think the lives of our churches too. And as our church, if we could learn to trust God more, to operate in His strength, in His will, in His power, rather than our own. So instead of asking God to bless what we do, in a sense, we ought to bless what God does, and try and live life more in His power and in His Spirit. And that's not always easy, because, as I say, as people, we like to be in control. We like to be in control. We like to, be masters of our own destiny. But actually, and it doesn't stop us being, but actually, if we could learn to trust God more and work in His strength and put a bit more trust and faith in Him, I believe that our Christian lives would become more interesting and exciting. And I think as the church, we'd become more effective. Thoughts for you? But 3 things for today, as I said. First thing, the Christian life is not always lived out in lovely, wacky spiritual experiences of serenity. Jesus had this experience of God on Transfiguration Mountain, but he came down into a hotbed of controversy when he got back. Secondly, the disciples, bless them, human beings like you and me. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it horribly wrong, and the Bible is not ashamed to remind us of the times when they got it wrong. And thirdly, even if we had a small amount of faith, God could do a great deal more through us. And if we could learn to have that little bit more faith and trust God that little bit more, I'm sure God could do a lot more with us. Our church would be more effective, and I believe that we'd be more enriched and more inspired in our Christian lives. Please pray for Tamworth. Please pray for today. Please pray for our church here. God bless you. Have a lovely day. And I'll